The royal attendants were the first to notice the stench. That distinct smell of human fear revealed itself. Maria Joseph Amalia, 16, of Saxony, had just fallen onto Chinese-imported silk sheets in the candlelit wedding room of the royal palace. In Madrid, evidence of total bodily submission was now stains on her white wedding gown. Like a set of dice for a doomed fate, the rosary beads in her shaking hands chimed against one another. It took precisely 3 seconds for her new husband, King Ferdinand VII of Spain, to become enraged. The wedding chamber's enormous oak doors flew open with such force that 2 guards staggered back. The King of Spain, AP, was standing in the opulent hallway of the most Catholic monarchy in Europe, fully nude, his deformity on display for a dozen terrified onlookers. He was yelling charges at attendants who hoped they could rip out his own eyes instead of witnessing what they were witnessing. How did a royal wedding night intended to establish a dynasty turn into such a spectacle of innate horror? And why would the sight of her husband cause a teenage princess who was brought up by nuns to be the ideal queen to lose all control over her body? We must go back 20 years of hidden atrocity in order to comprehend this catastrophe. Even a hardened Vatican clerk would be appalled by the contents of the letter, which arrived sealed with paper wax. Ferdinand VII had taken an unprecedented step in the history of the Catholic monarchy 3 months prior to that disastrous wedding night. In a direct letter to Pope Pius VII, he begged for divine intervention in the most personal of situations. In spite of what Ferdinand himself described as his unusual physical circumstances, the Pope had to persuade a teenage girl to surrender to the King of Spain. The original letters are still in the Vatican archives. Every sentence of Ferdinand's 12-page letter is more frantic than the one before it. He talks about his 2 prior spouses' unsuccessful attempts at consummation. He acknowledges consulting with 23 different European doctors. He even includes a medical graphic that explains the specifics of his anatomical challenge and is marked in his own hand. This is where things get worse, though. In fact, Pope Pius VII answered in a letter to a 16-year-old virgin. The spiritual head of 1 billion Catholics worldwide explained why she had to put up with whatever her husband's body required of her. Writing in his notebook, the Pope's secretary would subsequently destroy his private notes from those drafting sessions. "We are sending a lamb to slaughter," His Holiness sobbed as he sealed the letter. On a Tuesday, Maria Joseph got the letter from the Pope. According to witnesses, she read it 7 times, interspersing each reading with progressively frantic prayers. That night, she was seen trying to bargain with God himself by her lady-in-waiting, Countess von Matt. The young bride was systematically praying over each of the 37 rosaries she had spread out on her bed, one for each year of Ferdinand's life, in an attempt to turn them into armor against the impending attack. As Ferdinand meticulously prepared for his 3rd wedding, the Austrian ambassador to Vienna wrote, "The Saxon princess has been informed of her duties by the Holy Father himself. She speaks of martyrdom now, not marriage. Yesterday she asked her confessor if saints feel pain differently than ordinary women. He had no answer. He placed an order for brand new silk, bed linens that were almost translucent. Pride, nothing that would prevent skin contact was what he wanted. In order to better show off any signs of consummation, he had the walls of the wedding chamber painted white. He even ordered a special chair to be set next to the bed, where court doctors would be waiting to confirm the marriage as soon as it happened. The detail was really horrible. Dr. Pedro Castello, Ferdinand's personal doctor, wrote a manual for Maria Joseph. Anatomical illustrations and detailed directions on how a woman can position herself to accommodate Ferdinand's particular disability are included in this document, which was found in palace archives in 1931. Ferdinand's personal notes are in the margins. She needs to realize that dynasty is eternal, sorrow is transient, and royal duty takes precedence over personal comfort. Maria Joseph made one more desperate attempt 3 weeks prior to the wedding. She wrote to the Pope to inquire about the validity of a marriage consummated artificially. The Vatican's reaction was brutal and quick. Human ingenuity cannot get around God's plan for a royal union. On the morning of Maria Joseph's wedding, she received the last letter from the Pope. Paraspera et astra, through pain to the stars, was the only Latin line it included. That letter, which had changed from a blessing to a death sentence, would be in her bodice as she walked down the aisle. However, Ferdinand had already tried to use God as his pimp. The scent of decay and lavender filled the cedar box. There were 37 silk-wrapped gifts inside, each bearing a date and the name of a woman. After Napoleon's brother escaped Madrid, It was discovered by Joseph Bonaparte's administration while cataloguing the Spanish royal palace. The chest, which was concealed in Ferdinand's secret study behind a fake wall, symbolized something so unsettling that the French authorities at first denied it was real. There was a tiny square of blood-stained fabric in every silk packet. A woman's name, age, and date were printed on each label. The oldest was from 1802. 14 was the youngest victim on the list. We have discovered evidence of systematic predation that defies comprehension. The King of Spain has maintained a collection that would shame the devil himself. Let me explain what they found. Captain Michel Dubois, who led the infantry squad, wrote in his report, Carmen Bermudez, age 19, was listed on the first package they opened on January 15, 1802. Carmen was Ferdinand's riding instructor's daughter. This happened during Ferdinand's first marriage. Based on the date, while Maria Antonia, his wife, slept in the adjacent room. Like a holy treasure, the cloth was meticulously maintained between sheets of tissue paper. Isabel de Castro, age 17, was the second package, March 3, 1802. She was Ferdinand's mother's lady-in-waiting. The third was Maria Gonzalez, who was 22 years old in March 20, 1802. A palace seamstress, who abruptly vanished, is said to have made a comeback to her village. The pattern becomes terrifying at this point. Political events dominated the dates. After his father denied him succession rights in 1807, the collection expanded whenever Ferdinand was humiliated or faced a problem. 2 months and 7 new clothes despite having little access to victims. He wore 12 garments while under house imprisonment at Valencia. The label demonstrated that he had singled out slaves, noble daughters, and even his allies' wives. The suboction, however, was the most horrifying discovery. Instead of using white wrapping, 5 items were wrapped in black silk. These had extra notations that defied the necessary restriction. After one merely stated that he did not survive, the father was put to death. Refer to the doctor's notes. The names were cross-referenced by the French authorities with Madrid police files and palace employment records. The Bermudez household. 3 days following the date on his daughter's clothing, the riding teacher passed away in a hunting accident. Her brother, the seamstress Maria Gonzalez, was jailed for sedition and passed away while incarcerated. One design after another appeared. Ferdinand had singled out women whose families were in danger and who were unable to pursue justice without putting their lives in danger. In that chest, Captain Dubois found another item, a leather journal that was readable despite being water damaged. After every interaction, Ferdinand had written down his ideas. The entries begin with a hint of regret. Despite the weakness of the flesh, royal blood demands continuation. They changed into something different totally by 1807. Taking is how power is demonstrated. Every stain represents a sovereign signature. Everything was copied by the French. Demanding the restitution of all palace property was Ferdinand's first action upon regaining power in 1814. According to the French, the chest was destroyed during transit. To find out whether copies existed, Ferdinand tortured French inmates for 3 months before a historian discovered them in 1889 while studying Napoleonic Spain. They were concealed in the French military archives. Before the Spanish government stepped in, he published a single paragraph discussing his discovery. 2 weeks later, the historian was killed in a carriage accident. Palace staff recalled, but his notes disappeared. The monarch who returned from exile was even more dangerous than before, they whispered. They observed how some young ladies would be called up for royal audiences and then return transformed, pallid, and mute. They observed how, in private meetings with nobility, Ferdinand would show off small squares of silk, never providing an explanation but always looking for praise. She survived the meeting, married a merchant, and fled to the Americas out of fear as the Bermudez daughter. Her granddaughter would discover a note concealed in a Bible decades later. That night, the king took more than just blood. He stole my faith that God protects the innocent. Crowns are worn by some devils. The collection's earliest piece of clothing was from a time before Ferdinand even understood what sex was. The future Spanish monarch and his wife shared a bed for 11 months without being married. From anatomical impossibility, not virtue. Ferdinand, the Prince of Aureus at the time, had recently wed his cousin Maria Antonia of Naples in October 1802. The 18-year-old prince confidently walked into his wedding chamber. Sobbing, he left. The future king of Spain would sleep in the same bed as his wife for almost a year, unable to comprehend why his body refused to comply with his wishes. Every month Ferdinand was inspected by Dr. Manuel Godoy, the court physician. His medical records, which are kept at the Simonkas collection, depict growing frustration. According to GDOI, the prince has all the required elements, yet their configuration contradicts accepted function. Like a soldier carrying the wrong weapon for battle, he walks toward the marriage bed. Maria Antonia's bewilderment is evident in her letters to her sister. She wrote, "My husband is loving but perplexed. He tries an embrace that ends with an apology. He sobbed against my shoulder last night, claiming that God had cursed him. Though I'm not sure what we wait for, I told him that patience would pay off." The court in Spain became desperate. Consumption was necessary for succession. Queen Maria Luisa, Ferdinand's mother, took drastic action. French anatomical dolls were commissioned by her. She employed sex workers as teachers. Horrified, they left the palace, in the hopes that nature would teach where humans had failed. She even made arrangements for Ferdinand to observe animal reproduction. No one was willing to tell the truth out loud, thus nothing worked. Ferdinand was not the only one with this condition. It was prohibitive mechanically, using Latin euphemisms and ambiguous allusions to structural difficulties. The court medics skirted the truth in their reports. However, it was made clear in Dr. Godoy's private journal, which was found in 1923, the curvature of the prince's member is so prominent that it is impossible to couple normally. Both sides suffer when attempts are made, and neither party is satisfied. This is when the darkness begins. Ferdinand was unaware of the abnormality in his anatomy. Comprehensive sexual education was not exactly provided to royal princes. He thought that all guys had to deal with these difficulties, and that he was just not skilled at consummation. He used pillows for practice. He worked out for strength, using a device he had invented. He even tried to stretch the pertinent anatomy, which left him bedridden for a week. Maria Antonia, on the other hand, continued to be a virgin and was unaware of it. Having been up in a convent, she thought that the agonizing fumbling she had to go through every night was typical of marriage. In her letter to her confessor, she inquired as to whether all husbands wept after trying their duty and whether all wives bled without conception. In September 1803, things reached a breaking point. King Charles IV, Ferdinand's father, insisted on a medical proof of consumption. The court doctors had to make a hard decision: destroy the prince or lie to the king. They went with a compromise that left no one happy. According to their findings, the marriage had been partially consummated and would eventually become fully lawful. This was taken by Ferdinand as evidence of his insufficiency. His embarrassment turned to anger. He held Maria Antonia accountable for his shortcomings. He accused her of freezing his natural functions and practicing witchcraft. Persuaded that her being in the bed somehow hindered success, he forced her to sleep on the floor. Then followed the life-destroying schooling. In November 1803, Dr. Laurent Chapelle, a French physician, showed up at court. He was straightforward in his speech. Unlike the Spanish doctors, he informed Ferdinand that because of his malformed anatomy, he would never be able to engage in normal sexual activity, but that there were other options. In spite of the curvature, he showed angles and situations that would permit penetration. To help, he even created a leather support device. 14 months after his marriage, Ferdinand's first successful pairing took place on December 15, 1803. The lady-in-waiting for Maria Antonia claimed to have heard cries for an hour. The princess came out of the room, terribly bleeding. Ferdinand came out on top. The court rejoiced. At last an heir might be imagined. However, Ferdinand had made a mistake. He now realized that women were meant to suffer during sex, and that their suffering validated his achievement. He had learned that his deformities might be used as a weapon if used properly. Dr. Chapelle abruptly left Madrid in January of 1804. His remains were discovered close to the French border in a ditch along the road. A brigand's was listed as the official cause of death. His Spanish court medical records were never located. Before passing away from tuberculosis in 1806, Maria Antonia would have to put up with Ferdinand's newfound knowledge for 2 more years. There was only one pertinent line in her last confession, which was sealed for 100 years. "I'm grateful that my hubby is finally keeping his distance because of this disease." When Ferdinand eventually figured out how to have sex, his embarrassment turned into something far more serious. As their king oversaw Madrid's most heinous ceremony, the nobility stood in a circle with their pants about their ankles. Ferdinand's depravities ought to have been curbed by his exile and Valence. Rather, it focused them. The overthrown monarch established a tiny kingdom of shame while imprisoned in a French chateau with a small court of Spanish nobility. The ritualized degradation that resulted from what began as drunken, Admissions would plague Spanish royalty for many generations. It started out innocently enough. At Valencia, wine flowed freely. Napoleon made certain that his royal prisoner had a comfortable life. In 1809, during one especially drunken night, Count Diego d'Ilva grumbled about his wife's lack of warmth. Ferdinand chuckled. "You believe you are having issues? Allow me to demonstrate a genuine obstacle to marital happiness." His breeches were dropped by the king, Miguel de Oliver, who was there that evening and was secretly communicating with British intelligence, documented what transpired next. His Majesty turned carefully to make sure everyone saw his disfigurement, showcasing himself like a prize bull at market. A number of men gasped at the sharp curve. Count Silva puked into one of our flowers. Ferdinand wasn't done, though. He insisted on comparisons. "Come, gentlemen," he ordered them. The Spanish nobles revealed themselves one by one. "Let's see, who among us God has truly cursed?" Ferdinand's tone changed from cheerful to menacing when the nobles hesitated. "Or shall I remember this reluctance when I return to power?" Like a general examining troops, Ferdinand strolled among them, making remarks about each man's endowment. Count Mendoza was dubbed the Thimble by him. He gave the earthworm the name Duke Fernandez, as he gave a fictitious sermon about divine punishment. He made them hold these positions for 20 minutes. This started to happen every week. Ferdinand called his council of comparison every Thursday night. Attendance was required. With every session, the humiliation changed. He had them measure against lamps that were marked, to demonstrate their anatomical superiority over his own obstacles. He made them try a variety of positions. He also made a leather-bound logbook that listed each man's measurements and potential for performance. The exile court, however, was not limited to Spanish. Aristocrats, local servants, French guards, and even foreign merchants were forced to participate in Ferdinand's shows. He especially liked making men from lower social classes join the aristocratic. He would say to God and anatomy, "All men are equal except me. I am uniquely cursed and thus uniquely powerful." One of these sessions was observed by the French dean visiting Valens in 1811. The scene is described in his memoir. Dante could not have envisaged the hell created by the overthrown Spanish king. As they reveal themselves for the delight of the king, grown men cry. While his court stands nude and humiliated, Ferdinand sits dressed, crowned, and drinking wine. He asserts that this demonstrates his divine right and that God specifically chose him to rule. It becomes really convoluted at this point. Ferdinand started bringing in Parisian prostitutes for protests, but not for the usual reasons. He would make his nobles try sexual relations while he observed and critiqued their methods. He became furious when they were successful where he was unable to be without help. He said they were showing off their normalcy. For their functional anatomy, he forced them to apologize. Records were also left by the prostitutes. 3 of these sessions were attended by Marie de Four, who gave testimony to French police. The monarch of Spain demands horrors but pays quadruple charges. As he yells commands, he forces his soldiers to act like circus animals. Those who don't stay aroused are thrashed. Those who are successful are made fun of. This systematic degradation of human dignity is unlike any degeneracy I have witnessed in my line of work. The psychological harm was severe. In 1812, Count Silva made an attempt at suicide. For the remainder of his life, Duke Fernandez was unable to urinate in public. Due to his extreme nervousness, Salamanca's star left Valencia completely, opting to live in poverty rather than stay involved. Ferdinand, however, kept thorough records. He was fully aware of which aristocrats had taken part, what they had done, and what they had disclosed. During forced intimate moments, when he was restored, he would use these as weapons. Ferdinand's first private audiences were with his council of comparison. Veterans in 1814, following Napoleon's downfall and his return to Spain, he never made direct reference to Valence. He was not required to. Any document he provided was now signed by the men who had stood nude in that circle, and they endorsed any policy he suggested. He used their mutual embarrassment as political. Capito, later, the son of Count Mendoza, would discover his father's diaries from this time. According to one note, public humiliation wasn't enough. Ferdinand required victims who couldn't defend themselves. The king owns more than our loyalty. Now he owns our degradation. We are bound to him by chains of humiliation that no revolution can break. The sound of Maria Isabel's cries reverberated throughout the palace as she became aware that her husband had ordered her to be killed. The 26th of May, 1818, Maria Isabel of Portugal, Ferdinand's second wife, had been in labor for 36 hours. The stakes were high for Spain's future. A possible heir was carried by the Queen. However, Ferdinand made a choice that would come back to hurt even his admirers as the situation worsened. He was told by doctors that they could only rescue one of the mother and infant, not both. Ferdinand's reaction was swift and icy. "It's all about the child. You can swap out the Queen." The chief royal physician, Dr. José Costello, attempted to clarify that it would be torture to perform a cesarean section without the appropriate anesthesia. Ferdinand interrupted him, then hurried on. 12 witnesses saw what transpired, and each would subsequently testify before church investigators. Surgeons started cutting while 6 attendants kept the Queen down. They had given her a look, but it was not enough. This was a conscious decision because Ferdinand thought the youngster would be more willing to leave if they were in pain. As the scalpel pierced Maria Isabel's abdomen, she became completely conscious. Later, Duchess Carmen de Montijo, her lady-in-waiting, gave testimony. When Her Majesty realized what was happening, her eyes widened. "I was left with no choice but to hold her hand while they proceeded to cut," as she mouthed, "Help me." 43 minutes were spent on the procedure. Of them, 31 saw the Queen remain conscious. Throughout, Ferdinand ignored his wife's suffering and stood at the foot of the bed, asking reports on the child's status. Ferdinand turned down Maria Isabel's plea for additional laudanum. "It purifies," he said. "We should make a sacrifice to bring our child into the world." Dr. Miguel de Rivera, assisting in the operation, would later write, "I have performed battlefield amputations, but nothing prepared me for this sanctioned brutality." The Queen's strength was extraordinary. She survived far longer than medical science would predict. His Majesty seemed pleased by her endurance, as if it validated his decision. Here's the grotesque irony. The child was already dead. The physicians knew within minutes of beginning the procedure that the infant showed no signs of life. They continued cutting into a conscious woman to deliver a corpse because none dared tell Ferdinand his heir was gone. The Queen survived the surgery by 18 minutes, long enough to learn her child was stillborn, long enough to understand she had been tortured for nothing. Her final words, recorded by 3 witnesses, "Tell my mother the king is a demon." But Ferdinand's reaction was even more disturbing when informed both wife and child were dead. He examined the infant's body with clinical detachment. "The deformity is absent," he noted with satisfaction. "At least God spared my son that curse." He then ordered the Queen's body sewn up properly. He wanted an open casket funeral to display his grief. The cover-up began immediately. The official cause of death was listed as complications of childbirth. The 12 witnesses were dispersed across Spain's territories. Dr. Costello was promoted to chief medical advisor. Dr. Rivera fled to France and died in a suspicious fire 2 months later, but testimonies survived. Duchess de Montijo wrote everything in a letter to her cousin in Vienna, sewn into her corset. 2 attending nurses confessed to their priests who recorded the admissions before being transferred to missions in the Philippines. A palace guard named Antonia Ruiz kept a diary that wouldn't surface until 1890. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Ferdinand himself, in a moment of drunken vulnerability, confessed to his minister, Carlist Wars. "Isabel screamed like my first wife never could." There's honesty in that level of pain. "At least I gave her the gift of truth before she died." The church launched a secret investigation in 1819. Cardinal Luis de Bourbon interviewed the dispersed witnesses, compiled medical evidence, and concluded that Maria Isabel had been murdered through medical torture. His report recommended Ferdinand's excommunication. Pope Pius VII buried the report, declaring that the stability of Catholic monarchy supersedes individual justice. Ferdinand learned of the investigation. His response was to commission a portrait of Maria Isabel that still hangs in the proud church. She's depicted as serene, maternal, dying peacefully in childbirth. He made viewing the portrait mandatory for court functions. Witnesses were forced to admire his version of history while knowing the truth. Dr. Costello lived another 20 years, growing wealthy from royal favor. On his deathbed, he allegedly confessed, "I have delivered hundreds of babies and saved countless lives. However, I shall be held accountable for the one woman I assisted in killing on a royal command." Medical professionals who forget their oath have a unique place in hell. Ferdinand's treatment of a wife's body as disposable property would not end here. With shaking hands, the court physician displayed his creation, a silk cushion with a carefully sized hole that was the only thing separating conception from murder. Ferdinand had to deal with a succession issue after burying 3 wives. By 1829, as he waited for the monarch to pass away without having children. His brother Don Carlos circled like a vulture. Although Ferdinand required an heir, his notoriety came before him. Every European royal family was aware of his wife's fates. Negotiations that would embarrass a hostage exchange were necessary to get a fourth bride. Here comes 23-year-old Maria Cristina from Naples, who is Maria Cristina entered the marriage with open eyes. In contrast to Ferdinand's past spouses, King Francis, the first of the two Ceciles, her uncle, had gathered a lot of intelligence. She was aware of the abnormality. She was aware of the fatalities. She was aware of the silk cushions that contained criminal evidence. She was aware, however, that Spain needed an heir. She had also been conditioned to be a queen from infancy. Unprecedented provisions were incorporated in the marriage talks. Maria Cristina insisted on importing her own doctors from Naples. As frequency-duration positions, she needed written assurances of sexual constraints. Most astonishingly, she demanded a medical consultation to explore accommodations prior to the wedding. One of the strangest royal documents in history was the result of such deliberation. To come up with a solution, Dr. Pedro Costello met with Maria Cristina's personal doctor, Dr. Giovanni Battista. Their letters, which are kept in the State Archive of Naples, resemble the technical specifications for a torture device from the Middle Ages. His Majesty's ailment necessitates a 47 compensatory adjustment. Procreative necessity must be balanced with the princess's comfort. What was the answer? A precisely measured silk cushion that is 15 inches in diameter, 6 inches thick at the edges, and has a precisely measured depression in the middle. Whalebone stays were used to strengthen the hole so that it would hold up under pressure. To reduce friction burns, silk was used to cover the entire device. This is where it becomes ridiculously gloomy, though. They produced several prototypes. Before finalizing the final form, Ferdinand insisted on testing each design with royal prostitutes. Physicians who observed these medical trials noted pressure, locations, angles of entrance, and the amount of time until structural breakdown. Instructions, 14 pages of schematics illustrating ideal placement, cautions regarding weight distribution, maintenance needs, FSR, and the necessity to replace the silk after every third usage were all included with the cushion. Even backup preparations were in place in case the cushion failed during the meeting. 2 weeks prior to the wedding, Maria Cristina was given a copy of the handbook. Later, according to her lady-in-waiting, the princess was rehearsing postures with a dressmaker's dummy, learning angles like a student of mathematics, getting ready for an exam. The actual wedding night was planned like a military mission. In the antechamber, 2 doctors waited. The cushion was positioned in front in accordance with the guidelines. Maria Cristina had taken laudanum in just the right amounts to reduce feeling without affecting fertility. Only avoid the outbursts that accompanied Ferdinand's typical drunkenness. He had been limited only a single glass of wine. It was successful. The union was consummated without any serious harm. For the first time among Ferdinand's wives, Maria Cristina came out of the room on foot. Palissy stated that, although the cushion had served its purpose, it needed to be disposed of right now. Ferdinand ordered 3 spare cushions because he was so happy. This device became the focal point of the royal couple's regimen. Doctors set a plan for intimacy that coincided with her menstrual cycles. Ritual precision was used to prepare the cushion. Because of his notoriously bad hygiene, Ferdinand had to take a bath first. Another of Maria Cristina's ideas. The system showed results within a year. Maria Cristina was expecting a child. The court rejoiced, but she told her sister in secret, "Through deliberate obedience and mechanical interference, I have been bred like a prize mare, but I will survive this monster and give Spain its heir." Another level of negotiating was exposed by the pregnancy. Ferdinand had been expressly barred from the birthing chamber by Maria Cristina, who had insisted on using Italian midwives. The demise of Maria Isabel had taught her a valuable lesson. She showed a document that Ferdinand had signed during marriage negotiations in response to his protests. While concentrating on the cushion parameters, he had consented to these agreements. In October 1830, she gave birth to Isabella, a healthy daughter. Conception was not the only thing the cushion had made possible. A power dynamic had been established by Chateau. Ferdinand's former wives lacked something that Maria Cristina possessed: make use of leverage. She had remained healthy and had given him an heir through medical need. She managed access to intimacy. In the future, this cushion would conceive more than just an heir. It would birth a civil war. With his cushion-conceived daughter in the cradle, Ferdinand signed the document that would drown Spain in blood. Dr. Costello would later write, "The fourth queen succeeded where others failed, not through love or courage, but through engineering. She reduced His Majesty to a mechanical problem, requiring a mechanical solution." Isabella II was 3 days old when Ferdinand overturned 2 centuries of Spanish law. Salic law was repealed by the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, allowing for female succession. Ferdinand made his baby daughter the heir apparent and disinherited his brother, Don Carlos, with a single signature. Although that signature was inked, blood would be used to pay for it. 200,000 Spanish dead before the conflict was over. Don Carlos was at Mass when he got the news. According to witnesses, he squeezed the pew so tightly that his knuckles bled. His reaction was prompt and foretelling. "My brother has already been damned and is now requesting that Spain do the same." In a few hours, the Carlist faction was founded. Conservatives in Spain, who had put up with Ferdinand's personal vices, were against female succession. They saw it as the ultimate distortion of natural order that a female produced with medical equipment might inherit the throne. Rafael Delis, the bishop, roared from his pulpit, "Catholic Spain cannot be ruled by a spoiled bastard girl." But Ferdinand had expected opposition. He started using the same methodical brutality he had previously saved for the bedroom to rid Carlos. Supporters, the Toledo archbishop, who had doubted Isabella's legitimacy, was discovered dead in his quarters. Apoplexy was the stated cause. The arsenic found in his stomach during a covert autopsy was the unofficial cause. This is where Ferdinand's past sexual encounters turned into a political tool. Nobles who had taken part in his Valencia exhibitions were called upon by him. These men, united by a common humiliation, were presented with an option: encourage Isabella's succession or face public humiliation. Overnight, Count Mendoza, who was still hurt by his moniker, the thimble turned, became Isabella's most outspoken ally. Duke Fernandez used gold he could hardly afford to buy pro-Isabella propaganda. With horrified fascination, Maria Cristina observed this blackmail effort. She wrote to her sister, "My husband wields shame like a sword. Half the court supports our daughter, not from loyalty, but from fear of exposure. We are building a throne on foundations of humiliation." The medical establishment was conscripted. Dr. Costello was ordered to publicly certify Isabella's conception as divinely ordained despite physical obstacles. He complied, knowing too much about royal chambers to refuse. His medical certification became a state document distributed across Spain as proof of God's blessing on female succession. But Don Carlos had weapons of his own. He circulated pamphlets describing the silk cushion in grotesque detail. Cartoons appeared showing Ferdinand mounting a pillow while Maria Cristina counted coins. One particularly vicious broadsheet depicted Isabella emerging not from a womb but from a whalebone frame. The succession crisis deepened when Ferdinand fell ill in September 1832 for 48 hours. Spain had 2 kings. Ferdinand, barely conscious, was manipulated into signing a revocation of the Pragmatic Sanction. Don Carlos's supporters celebrated in the streets. Maria Cristina, showing steel her husband never possessed, physically blocked ministers from publicizing the document. Then Ferdinand recovered. His first act was to execute everyone who had participated in the revocation attempt. The palace courtyards ran red with blood. The document itself was burned in a public ceremony where Ferdinand declared, "God gave me a daughter through extraordinary means. Those who question his methods question his wisdom." The irony was excruciating. Ferdinand, who had spent decades treating women as disposable objects, now staked his legacy on a female heir. The man who had collected blood-stained cloths as trophies was fighting for his daughter's right to rule. The monster had become, through political necessity, a champion of female succession, but the damage was irreversible. Spain split into 2 armed camps before Ferdinand even died. Carlos militias formed in the mountains. Isabella's supporters fortified cities. The first skirmishes began in 1833. Technically, while Ferdinand still lived, Spanish brothers shot each other over the legitimacy of a toddler conceived through medical engineering. Ferdinand spent his final months in delicious denial. He played with Isabella, calling her "my little miracle." He revised his will 17 times, each version adding more protections for her succession. He even commissioned a portrait of the child sitting on the throne, as if painting could make it permanent. On his deathbed in September 1833, Ferdinand made one last grotesque gesture. He demanded the silk cushion be brought to him. Witnesses reported he clutched it while dying. whispering, "This gave me immortality." Whether he meant Isabella or the coming carnage remains unclear. His death unleashed hell. Don Carlos declared himself Carlos V within hours. Isabella's supporters proclaimed the 3-year-old Isabella II. The First Carlist War began before Ferdinand's body was cold. Spain would bleed for 7 years, then bleed again, then again. Ferdinand would die peacefully in his bed, but his legacy was just beginning its bloody work. The first shots of the Carlist War were fired over a silk cushion's consequences. October 2, 1833. Ferdinand's body lay in state while Madrid erupted. In the Basque provinces, church bells rang, not in mourning, but in celebration. Don Carlos had promised to restore the old ways, to erase the abomination of female succession. Within 72 hours of Ferdinand's death, 17 separate Carlist uprisings exploded across northern Spain. The war over a cushion-conceived child had begun. The first massacre happened in Tala. Carlist forces surrounded a government garrison, shouting death to the Queen's bastard. The portrait sent from Madrid showed Ferdinand from only one angle, his body obscured by royal robes that seemed strangely bulky. That final night, Maria Joseph wrote in her diary, "Tomorrow I become Queen of Spain. I ask God to give me the bravery to face whatever responsibilities lie ahead." According to Mum, all brides are afraid of the unknown. My fear must be common. King Ferdinand will undoubtedly treat a virgin bride with kindness. Surely God would not let his anointed monarch be cruel. Meanwhile, in his chambers, Ferdinand prepared with ritualistic precision. He ordered his body servants to bathe him twice, scrubbing until his skin was raw. He had the wedding chamber inspected repeatedly, ensuring the physicians waited nearby, that the special cushions were properly positioned. He drank wine mixed with bull's blood, convinced it would enhance his virility. He practiced positions with pillows, muttering about angles and leverage. His valet, Diego Morales, later testified, "His Majesty was more agitated than I'd ever seen." He continued to study himself in mirrors, modifying his stance to reduce the apparent curvature. He kept asking if the bride had heard anything. When, assured of her complete innocence, he smiled in a way that chilled my soul. The palace staff knew what was coming. Servants who had witnessed previous wedding nights requested reassignment. The royal physicians prepared strong sedatives, though they doubted the young queen would accept them. The Laresses laid out extra sheets, knowing from experience what would be required. In her final hours of innocence, Maria Joseph was subjected to the pre-wedding rituals. Court ladies examined her for virginity, confirming what everyone knew. She was untouched, unprepared, about to be destroyed. They dressed her in a nightgown of silk so fine it was nearly transparent. They brushed her hair until it shone like Saxon gold. They perfumed her with oils that would soon mix with terror sweat. The Duchess of Osuna, overseeing preparations, fought tears. She had attended Ferdinand's second wedding, had heard Maria Isabel's screams during the fatal Sitzine. Now she was preparing another lamb for slaughter. When Maria Joseph asked if marriage hurt, the Duchess could only respond, "God gives us strength for our trials." As dawn approached, Maria Joseph was allowed one final confession. Father Antonio Molina, her confessor, later broke sacred confidence to record her words. She asked if it was sinful to fear her husband. She asked if God would forgive her if she failed in her duties. She asked why her hands wouldn't stop shaking. I gave her absolution for sins she had not yet suffered. The wedding itself was magnificent torture. Maria Joseph walked down the aisle of the royal chapel like a saint. Approaching martyrdom, Ferdinand waited at the altar, dressed in gold bride that couldn't disguise his awkward stance. When he took her hand, witnesses noted how she flinched at his touch. When he lifted her veil for the kiss, her face went pale at whatever she saw. In his eyes, Cardinal Luis de Bourbon performed the ceremony with visible reluctance. His sermon on marital duties was so vague that Ferdinand interrupted. Perhaps His Eminence could be more specific about welly submission. The cardinal's hands shook as he completed the sacrament that would lead to sacrilege. The wedding feast lasted 7 hours. Maria Josepha ate nothing, sipped water, smiled at congratulations that felt like condolences. Ferdinand drank heavily, his excitement building visibly. When cautious made traditional rival jokes about the wedding night, the bride's fixed smile never wavered, but tears gathered in her eyes. As midnight approached, the moment arrived. Maria Joseph was escorted to the wedding chamber by matrons who knew what awaited her. At the threshold, she turned back once, looking for escape that didn't exist. In just hours, those white silk sheets would be stained with more than virgin blood. The chamber door closed with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Inside, 16-year-old Maria Joseph faced her husband for the first time in true privacy. Ferdinand had dismissed all servants except the physicians waiting in the antechamber. Ferry wanted no witnesses to what would come next. "Undress," he commanded, when the virgin bride hesitated, fumbling with the silk ribbons of her nightgown. Ferdinand's patience evaporated. He tore the garment from her body with such violence that she stumbled backward. That's when she saw him fully for the first time. Ferdinand had removed his royal robes. In the candlelight, his deformity was unmistakable. A grotesque curvature that transformed what should have been natural into something monstrous. Maria Joseph's eyes went wide, her mouth opened in a silent scream. Her body, raised in convents and innocent of all carnal knowledge, reacted with pure animal terror. She lost control of her bowels. The stench filled the chamber immediately. Brown liquid ran down the princess's legs, pooling on Persian carpets that had covered these floors for centuries. Ferdinand's face transformed from lust to rage. In an instant he began screaming, not words, but primal sounds of fury and disgust. Maria Joseph collapsed, not a graceful faint, but a complete surrender of muscle control. She hit the floor hard, her head striking the bedpost. Blood joined the excrement, already staining the chamber. She lay there twitching, rosary beads still clutched in one hand, her body's rebellion complete. Ferdinand burst from the chamber like a man fleeing fire. He was completely naked, his deformity exposed to the dozen attendants waiting in the corridor. "Clean it up," he roared. "Clean up what your Saxon princess has done." He grabbed the nearest courtier, the elderly Duke of Medina, and shook him violently. "Is this what you bring me for a queen?" As the doctors hurried past him into the chamber, they discovered Maria Joseph, half conscious, bathed in her own blood and waste. A girl who shits herself like a peasant. Dr. Costello would later write, the young queen had suffered a complete, nervous collapse. In addition to rejecting the monarch, her body had also rejected consciousness. Mumbling prayers in German, she lay like a broken doll in her own filth. The chamber was cleaned by 6 servants. They set fire to the blankets, the carpets, and even the wedding dress of Maria Joseph. After being bathed and sedated, the princess was placed in bed. "Am I dead? Is this hell?" was her initial reaction when she woke up 12 hours later. Ferdinand refused to try consummation for 3 weeks. With the silk pillow, potent wine, and a resolve to defy his bride's wishes, he eventually made his way back to the marriage bed. Maria Joseph persevered. She became pregnant. She let Spain breathe, but that first night never left her. She would soil herself whenever Ferdinand came near. According to palace servants, her body had never unlearned a trauma response. This horror show's dynasty was doomed from the start. The child of those violent couplings, Isabella II, inherited a heritage of dysfunction and sexual violence in addition to her reign. With her father's appetites and none of his guile, she would control Spain. Her own excesses would ultimately achieve what the 3 Carlist Wars were unable to. The whole breakdown of Ferdinand's lineage. Isabella fled to France with her father's collection of blood-stained cloths and jewelry when the revolution struck in 1868. Sex and politics became inseparable weapons under the monarchy that had claimed 200,000 lives in civil wars and converted royal bedrooms into torture chambers. A train voyage into exile marked the end of it all. More would be lost for Spain. Decades of repression, additional civil wars, and dictatorships would result from the instability Ferdinand brought about. Spain wouldn't have a stable democracy until 1978. 159 years have passed since the night a teenage bride soiled herself out of fear. Portraits of Ferdinand VII and his wives are displayed in gilded frames in the Prau Museum today. Tour guides discuss the succession problem and political difficulties. The cushions, the blood, and the girl who lost control of her bowels upon witnessing the royal abomination are all left out. However, history is preserved in the testimonials, records, and DNA of the trauma that occurred in Spain. Izzy DNA, the heritage of Ferdinand lives on. While some monarchs are known for their wisdom, others for their victories, Ferdinand VII is known for a sexual problem that ruined a country, a deformity that killed hundreds of thousands of people, and a wedding night that started and concluded with a dynasty drowning in blood. They claim that the odor never completely left that room.